Of all the fights in Naruto, Team Taka vs B is easily one of the most entertaining to watch. After all, finally getting to know who the 8 Tails Jinchuriki was, seeing Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan in action for the very first time, and showing how Taka works together as a unit, all made this fight extremely memorable. But by the end of the battle, it was made pretty clear that B was far out of Taka's league, and he even managed to successfully trick them into taking a tentacle clone so he could goof off and write rap lyrics instead of training in the village. To cut Taka some slack, B was literally the strongest Jinchuriki we had ever seen up to this point in the series, and most members of the Akatsuki probably would have failed to capture him as well. So, I thought it would be fun to analyze how the other 8 Jinchuriki would fare if Taka tried to capture them instead. The only rules set in place for these battles will be that the Jinchuriki obviously have to be captured alive, and that the battlefield will be the same one that Taka fought B in. Starting off, I do want to go over how strong Taka is as a whole, just so we're all on the same page about what they're capable of doing during the actual matchups. Of all the members of Taka, Karin is by far the easiest to talk about because she literally just serves the role of a portable battery pack for Sasuke. It may sound like I'm joking, but until we see Karin awaken her adamantine chains to destroy the wood statue in the War Arc, she seriously has 0 feats in terms of actual combat. That being said, this still doesn't change the fact that Karin is easily one of the best support type shinobi in the entire series. As an Uzumaki, Karin has a boatload of chakra, and because of that, Sasuke is able to refill his chakra supply and heal his wounds by biting her. This is a pretty big deal because we see that in the original fight with B, when Sasuke got stabbed 6 times, Karin was able to heal him instantly. And right after that, Sasuke was back up and ready to fight again. So, Karin's healing abilities will give Sasuke a lot of leeway in these battles, as she essentially serves as a get out of jail free card if Sasuke ever takes damage that would normally be lethal. Plus, Karin is also a sensory type shinobi, and it's stated in the 3rd data book that her sensory powers even surpass ocular jutsu. This implies that Karin's sensory is not only greater than the Sharingan, but the Byakugan as well, which means that it's pretty much going to be impossible for anyone to catch Taka off guard while Karin is on the team. The only real downside to Karin is that she understandably doesn't allow anyone but Sasuke to bite her, so only Sasuke will be able to take advantage of her healing abilities. However, this still doesn't change the fact that Karin is a vital member of Team Taka, and arguably the 2nd most valuable person on the team behind Sasuke himself. This isn't to say that Sasuke's other teammates aren't useful though, because both Suigetsu and Jugo are extremely strong combatants. From the first time we see them, it's made very clear that Jugo and Suigetsu are equals, since they clashed equally during their fight, with the databooks noting that their fight ended in a draw. So in terms of raw power, any feat that Suigetsu accomplishes can likely be attributed to Jugo as well. This is pretty impressive for both of them, since Suigetsu was able to block sword slashes from Killer B to save Sasuke, and in order to actually cut through the Executioner's blade, B needed to further amplify his sword with lightning style. The reason why this feat is so great for Suigetsu and Jugo is because even without lightning style, B's swords were able to pierce Kisame during their fight. Keep in mind, a clone of Kisame with 30% of his chakra was capable of tanking an Asakujaku kick from 6 Gate Guy, which means that Suigetsu and Jugo scaling 2 attacks that are strong enough to damage Kisame indicates that they're actually somewhat comparable to early Shippuden Guy's taijutsu, as crazy as that sounds. And, similar to Karin, these two also have very unique abilities, which is why Sasuke chose them to be on his team in the first place. For Jugo, the Kekkei Genkai of his clan allows him to instinctively wield nature energy to amplify the power of his attacks, and enter a state similar to that of the Curse Mark. Using this power, Jugo was capable of giving Sasuke his cells to heal him right after he got his ribcage torn apart by B. which is a ridiculous regeneration feat that I would say is even comparable to Karin's, as Sasuke literally goes from being on the ground dying to casting the Amaterasu in the span of a couple minutes. And, believe it or not, despite Jugo's crazy abilities, I actually think that Suigetsu would be even more helpful in these battles, since his Kekkei Genkai allows him to not only transform himself into water, but also freely control any body of water in the surrounding area. This is extremely important because if you remember the Bee fight, there was a lot of water on the battlefield, and Suigetsu used it to form a water-style avatar that was capable of pushing back a fully transformed Eight Tails, and even shielded Taka from Bee's tailed beast bomb. Admittedly, Suigetsu was completely out of commission after he did this, but the fact that he survived the attack and prevented the rest of Taka from being harmed is still an absolutely insane feat for Suigetsu's water avatar, which will definitely come in clutch when fighting the other Jinchuriki. Last but not least, the only remaining member of Taka to go over is its leader, Sasuke Uchiha. In general, I would say that this version of Sasuke is by far the weirdest one to scale, because despite awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan, which provides a major power boost, Sasuke had also just lost the curse mark, and was still recovering from the fight with Itachi, which Jugo notes made him physically weaker. So, in my opinion, this is actually one of the rare scenarios where you can't use Sasuke's past feats from earlier in Shippuden to determine how fast or strong he should be now. However, this isn't to say that Sasuke is physically weak, because he was still capable of deflecting a strike from Bee wielding the Executioner's Blade. This means that Sasuke has even better strength scaling than Suigetsu and Jugo, since the Executioner's Blade is obviously stronger than Bee's regular swords, implying that Sasuke is likely strong enough to damage shinobi on the level of Kisame and Guy as well. Plus, in terms of speed, Sasuke is also the most impressive of Taka, because contrary to popular belief, he was doing a decent job at keeping up with base Bee. While this is very much depicted differently in the anime, where Bee was easily running laps around Sasuke, in the manga, Sasuke actually managed to deflect 18 sword strikes from Bee in a row before he got overwhelmed, which is very impressive since even in base, Bee was easily fast enough to keep up with Kisame. And since a clone of Kisame with only 30% of his chakra forced Guy to use the 6th gate, Sasuke should have speed comparable to 5th gate Guy at the bare minimum. So, despite having injuries from his fight with Itachi, it should be pretty clear that Sasuke is an absolute monster. And on top of this, Sasuke also has the Amaterasu in his back pocket, which is an extremely powerful jutsu that is stated to be the strongest physical attack by Black Zetsu. To be fair, this is referring to Itachi's Amaterasu, which should be stronger than Sasuke's at this point in the series, but even when used by Sasuke, the Amaterasu did destroy several tentacles from a fully transformed Killer Bee, which is extremely impressive because we later see that Bee is capable of somewhat tanking the explosion from his own Biju bomb. From all of this, it should be pretty clear that Taka is a very powerful team, and for 99% of the shinobi world, taking them on would be practically impossible. However, this isn't to say that Team Taka will have an easy time against all the Jinchuriki, because a lot of them are extremely powerful as well, including Taka's first opponent, the 5th Kazekage Gaara. To be clear, the version of Gaara being used in this battle is from the Deidara fight, because after that, Shukaku was extracted from him, which means that he no longer qualified as a Jinchuriki. This kind of puts me in an awkward spot because all of Gaara's best feats are during the 5 Kage Summit, and in my opinion, I don't think it's accurate to judge how strong Gaara was earlier in Shippuden based off of his showings there. I know this might be surprising since at first glance, it doesn't make sense for Gaara to get stronger after losing his tailed beast, but when you really think about it, after part 1, Gaara pretty much never relies on Shukaku heavily again. We get direct confirmation in the war arc that Gaara's automatic sand defense was caused by his mother, not the One-Tails, and as stated by Kishimoto himself in an interview, Gaara's control over sand was something permanently ingrained inside him. so that wasn't affected by the loss of Shukaku either. This means that the One-Tails pretty much provided no benefit to Gaara, and it's very possible that he could have gotten stronger, since the 5 Kage Summit took place over 6 months after Gaara's fight with Deidara at the very least. We know this because after Gaara had been rescued, it was stated that Orochimaru had half a year left before he could attempt to take over Sasuke's body, which ended up happening way before the 5 Kage Summit took place. However, even though Gaara's showings in the 5 Kage Summit may not be applicable to when he was a Jinchuriki, I still think that Gaara would be capable of keeping up with Taka in general, because we see that the way Deidara described the speed of a physically stronger Sasuke was almost identical to the comments he made about the sand in Gaara's gourd. Specifically, Deidara goes out of his way to mention that both of them are swift, and further concedes that Sasuke is too fast for him to keep up with, alongside describing Gaara's sand as lightning fast. This idea is also supported by the way that Deidara decided to fight against them as well, since right after realizing that Sasuke is too fast for him, Deidara used the C2 Dragon to stay outside of his attacking range. And when it came to fighting against Gaara, Deidara got around the superior speed of his sand by secretly implanting clay bombs inside it, so that when Gaara's automatic defense activated, the clay would explode from the inside, eliminating the need for Deidara to outspeed the sand itself. I know some people will mention that Deidara said capturing Gaara alive was the hardest part of their fight, but I don't see why this would be a reason for him to specifically hold back his speed, and it is also just stated in the 3rd data book that Gaara wasn't fighting with lethal intent either, yet still had an advantage against Deidara until he was forced to protect the village. So this argument does go both ways. Because of this, if you do go off of the comments Deidara made about the swiftness of Sasuke and Gaara's sand, I think it's fair to say that they are somewhat comparable in speed, which means that Gaara is going to be able to defend himself against Taka pretty well, especially since in the original fight with B, Suigetsu and Jugo both tried to take him on individually before fighting him as a group, which will not go well against Gaara to say the least. After all, we've already seen both of these guys get effortlessly manhandled by base Sasuke, and there's no reason why Gaara's sand wouldn't be able to do the same thing. And unlike B, who seemingly let Jugo return to Taka because he wasn't taking the fight seriously, Gaara isn't just going to let them go, since we clearly see that against Deidara, he was fighting to break limbs. The only real trouble I might see Gaara having against either of these two is when dealing with Suigetsu's hydrification, since that is a blatant counter to the sand coffin. However, this isn't to say that Gaara has no way to take Suigetsu down, because he can still trap Suigetsu in a ball of sand, just like the one he used against Deidara, since it's not like turning into water would help Suigetsu once he's trapped inside. Admittedly, the sand ball won't be as big as the one used against Deidara, since Gaara doesn't have an entire desert at his disposal here, but Suigetsu still shouldn't be capable of breaking out regardless, since Gaara's sand was easily capable of tanking the explosions from Deidara's bombs, which could harm the Three Tails. To be fair though, if Suigetsu merges with the water in the battlefield beforehand, then I don't know if Gaara has a concrete way to put him down, but as I've already mentioned, in the beginning of the actual fight, Suigetsu just recklessly rushed B by himself on dry land. So in character, he would probably opt to do the same thing here. Because of this, I think that Gaara would be able to defeat Suigetsu pretty handily, and the exact same thing goes for Jugo, which means that the main threat he has to worry about when fighting Taka is Sasuke himself. Gaara vs Sasuke is particularly interesting to me, since even though Sasuke is generally an overall stronger combatant, I think that Gaara has pretty good counters to a lot of his arsenal. This is because almost all of Sasuke's attacks are short to mid-range ninjutsu, which is why he struggled so much against Deidara, with the 3rd databook even implying that it was a stylistically bad matchup for Sasuke. So, Gaara being able to fly and attack from a distance, just like Deidara, will be able to give Sasuke a decent amount of trouble, especially since Sasuke no longer has the curse mark, which means that flying is completely off the table for him. this means that Sasuke is going to have to really reach into his arsenal to defeat Gaara, because in terms of ninjutsu, Sasuke only has 2 long-range attacks that would be capable of tagging him, which are Kirin and the Amaterasu. I think that the Kirin win condition for Sasuke is pretty self-explanatory, since it's stated to be the strongest lightning-style jutsu in the 3rd data book, and Black Zetsu himself considered Kirin to be impossible to dodge, just like the Amaterasu, which leads me to believe that it would be both fast and strong enough to take Gaara out. But the problem I have with Kirin is that it might be too strong in this scenario, as silly as that sounds, because Taka has to capture Gaara alive. Of course, if you think that Kirin wouldn't be strong enough to outright kill Gaara, and the lightning would just incapacitate him, then it's absolutely a valid win condition for Taka, but otherwise, Sasuke may just not use Kirin because he still has to bring Gaara to the Akatsuki alive, which is a part of what makes capturing Jinchuriki so difficult. As for Amaterasu, despite it arguably being Sasuke's strongest jutsu at this point in the series, it would be almost entirely useless against Gaara, although not for the reasons you might think. Contrary to popular belief, Gaara never directly intercepted Sasuke's Amaterasu during the 5 Kage summit, because throughout the entire fight, Sasuke was only using Inferno style to throw pieces of an already existing Amaterasu orb at Gaara. So, since there's no reason to believe that Sasuke controlling the flames with Inferno style is as fast as the Amaterasu itself being casted, this feat doesn't prove that Gaara's sand defense is quick enough to block it. But I don't think it actually matters whether or not Gaara's absolute defense can intercept Sasuke's Amaterasu, because even if it can't, the Amaterasu would just end up landing on his sand armor anyways. And we've already seen that when the Amaterasu hit the clothes of the samurai, they were still completely fine after their armor was taken off, meaning Gaara can just remove his sand armor after getting hit to take no damage. Plus, on the flip side, Gaara's main win condition to take Sasuke down is pretty simple, since the sand coffin would be capable of dealing massive damage to him if it lands. Sasuke is still physically recovering from his fight with Itachi, implying that his durability isn't the best it's ever been, to say the least. And every time B landed a clean hit on Sasuke in their fight, he would have literally been one-shot if not for the healing of Karin and Jugo. Of course, B is an absolute unit, so I don't think that this is a horrendous anti-feat for Sasuke, but it still leaves us with no real metric to determine his durability, which is why Sasuke would probably be cooked if Gaara manages to catch him within his sand coffin. But even when taking this into account, I honestly still lean towards Taka being capable of capturing Gaara successfully, because of one factor I haven't mentioned yet, which is Sasuke's Genjutsu. Throughout the entire series, Gaara has never once shown the ability to resist Genjutsu, so if he gets caught in one by a Mangekyo Sharingan, it's probably game over for him. And we've seen that Gaara had no qualms looking directly at Sasuke during the 5 Kage summit, which means that he's probably going to do the same thing here. To be fair, you can try to twist this encounter in Gaara's favor, since Sasuke didn't use Genjutsu on him here, potentially implying that in character, Sasuke just wouldn't try it, but I think it's important to remember that Sasuke was having an ongoing conversation with Gaara about his descent into darkness, and spent a decent amount of time using Amaterasu to test Gaara's absolute defense, before comparing it to his Susanoo, which may have been the reason why Sasuke didn't resort to using Genjutsu in this encounter. So, considering that in this scenario, Sasuke's sole objective is to capture Gaara, and he also has less room to mess around due to being very weakened, Sasuke should be much more willing to use Genjutsu here, just like he did against B. Because of this, I do just lean towards Taka being capable of beating Gaara more times than not, which isn't to say that Gaara has no chance of winning. However, considering that Sasuke could probably afford to get hit by Gaara at least once due to Karin's ability to heal him, whereas if Gaara gets caught in Genjutsu at any point in the fight, he 100% loses right then and there, Sasuke has way more room for error to mess up in this fight, which is why I think it's more consistent for Taka to take the W. Next up, the Jinchuriki squaring off against Team Taka is Yugito, who houses the Two Tails. Now I will say that scaling Yugito and the other 6 Jinchuriki that fought against Naruto and B can be a little tricky, since some people are quick to say that the Jinchuriki were actually fast enough to keep up with KCM Naruto, but this argument only really works if you leave out the entire context of the fight. This is because the Jinchuriki were being actively controlled by Obito, using the same method that Nagato did to control the paths of pain. So, when you take into account that Nagato was able to make literal corpses powerful enough to compete with Sage Mode Naruto, then it becomes almost impossible to argue that Obito, someone who is implied to have even stronger chakra transmission with the rods than Nagato himself, wasn't making the Jinchuriki stronger. Plus, it is just stated that Obito's Sharingan and Rinnegan were enhancing both the Jinchuriki's perception and their abilities as well, which further proves that the Jinchuriki became stronger as Edo Tensei. Although, I will say that there is one super valuable insight that this fight tells us about these 6 Jinchuriki, which is that even while alive, they should be relative to each other in speed. We clearly see throughout the entire fight that the Jinchuriki are capable of keeping pace with each other, and since all of them were being amplified equally by Obito, it implies that even without the boost granted by his Rinnegan, the Jinchuriki aren't significantly faster than one another. This essentially means that the speed feats accomplished by any Jinchuriki, from the 2 Tails to the 7 Tails, should be applicable to all of them. With this in mind, scaling Yugito and the rest of the Jinchuriki to Taka in speed actually becomes much more simple, since it was heavily implied that Roshi was fast enough to put up a fight against Kisame. I say this because when speaking to Itachi, Kisame stated that fighting against Roshi and his corrosion style was painful before complaining that he's tired of hunting Jinchuriki. If you give Roshi the benefit of the doubt, it's possible to argue that for him to give Kisame a painful fight, it implies that Roshi has to be capable of reacting to Kisame's attacks. With this higher end interpretation of Roshi, it should directly scale him to Taka in speed, since Kisame could keep up with pre-War Arc B, who had the edge against Sasuke, and easily whooped the rest of Taka. Because of this, all the Jinchuriki who were resurrected by Obito, including Yugito, Yagura, Roshi, Han, Utakata, and Fu, should generally be fast enough to fight against Taka. But even though Yugito does have the speed to combat Taka, whether or not she's actually powerful enough to defeat them is an entirely different question, because at the end of the day, Yugito was soundly beaten by Hidan and Kakuzu, who are hands down the weakest Akatsuki duo. And, to make things even worse, it's stated in Shonen Jump that they were able to capture her effortlessly, implying that at the very least, Kakuzu had a pretty easy time beating Yugito up. This is pretty bad, considering that even Kakashi was able to tank Kakuzu's wind-style jutsu point blank, and later on successfully intercepted Kakuzu's false darkness, showing that they are fairly relative. Of course, Kakuzu is definitely the stronger of the two, as he was primarily pressing Kakashi throughout their fight, but at the end of the day, it is still true that beginning of Shippuden Kakashi could keep up with him for an extended period of time. Yet, despite this, Kakuzu could casually catch a paw strike from a full power Yugito, then effortlessly beat her in a fight, all the while fighting alongside Hidan, the self-proclaimed slowest Akatsuki member. Honestly, when taking this into account, even Suigetsu by himself may unironically be a threat to Yugito if he forms his water avatar from the lake. I mean, this avatar was physically strong enough to push back the full 8 Tails, and considering Yugito's main method of attacking seems to be fire style, which has an elemental disadvantage against water, Suigetsu could do a decent job at pushing her around. The only win condition I could see for Yugito to handily beat Suigetsu is if she decides to use a Biju Bomb at the very beginning of the fight to take Taka out in one attack. Since we've already seen Suigetsu sacrifice himself to shield the rest of Taka from B's Biju Bomb, he will probably do the same thing here. In this absolute best case scenario for Yugito, she might be able to knock Suigetsu out with a Biju Bomb, but at the end of the day she's still completely screwed because she has no way to counter Sasuke's Amaterasu. We've already seen that the Amaterasu is capable of devouring fire itself, which means that Yugito is going to be at a massive disadvantage here, considering that's the only type of ninjutsu she's been shown to use. And, unlike B, Yugito has no way to escape the flames, so she's probably finished if Sasuke decides to use it. Taking all of this into account, I think Taka should be able to beat Yugito pretty handily, because the terrain heavily favors them here. Suigetsu will be able to counter at least one of her Biju bombs, and Yugito unfortunately has no way to deal with Sasuke's newly awakened Mangekyo Sharingan. Although, someone who could put up a way better fight against Taka is Yagura, the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails. Unlike the large majority of Jinchuriki, Yagura is implied to have actually achieved control over his Biju, with Danzo stating that Yagura is one of the few shinobi to have ever achieved true control over his tailed beast, alongside Killer Bee, Madara, and Hashirama. Now admittedly, it is contentious whether or not Yagura had the full cooperation of the Three Tails in the exact same way that Naruto and B did, since Danzo also cited Hashirama as an example here, when all he did was suppress the tailed beasts with his wood style rather than actively work together with them. So, if you aren't charitable to Yagura, it is possible to argue that he just fought Isobu to take his chakra in the same way that Naruto did to obtain KCM1. That being said, even if you do use this lower end interpretation of Yagura, his control over the Three Tails chakra would still be miles better than KCM Naruto's, because it is stated in the 4th data book that Yagura had complete control over his tailed beast, implying that he could use all of Isobu's chakra, whereas Naruto still only had access to a portion of Kuruma's. This is supported by the fact that Team Jiraiya had seen both Han and Roshi form chakra avatars to use Biju bombs, and later filed a mission report of their encounter to the Leaf Village, yet Danzo still left these two out of the people he considered to have true control over their tailed beasts. So, Danzo deciding to include Yagura, despite leaving out both Han and Roshi, likely means that Yagura has better control over his tailed beast than they do, which implies that at the bare minimum, Yagura should be able to form a Three Tails avatar and fire off Biju bombs as well. When taking this into account, I think that Yagura is going to have a significant advantage over Taka in terms of raw power. In order to steal the Three Tails' chakra, it implies that base Yagura had to fight it in the same way that Naruto took on Kurama and won. This is pretty insane, because while Naruto had help from both Killer Bee and Kushina to take the Nine Tails down, to our knowledge, Yagura didn't have any of that, meaning he unironically had to beat up the Three Tails on his own to steal its chakra. This means that Yagura himself is already a tailed beast level combatant, and he can then stack the full chakra of the Three Tails on top of his already existing strength. Because of this, Taka is seriously going to struggle against Yagura, since they just don't have the firepower to compete with someone who's competent at controlling their tailed beast. Of course, you could argue that Sasuke doesn't need to overpower Yagura, since he can use Genjutsu, but the problem with this is that in general, it becomes incredibly difficult to subdue a shinobi with Genjutsu if they have very large chakra reserves and good chakra control, which isn't great for Sasuke since Yagura has control over the chakra of the full Three Tails. This is the reason why Kisame was so surprised when it was found out that Obito could control Yagura with Genjutsu, and specifically points out that Yagura was a Jinchuriki while expressing how shocked he was. So, it is just very consistent for Jinchuriki with access to a large portion of their tailed beast chakra to be extremely resistant to Genjutsu. Considering the person with the most chakra that Sasuke has ever managed to put under Genjutsu at this point in the series is B with his version 1 cloak, I seriously doubt he'd be able to do the same to Yagura. Sure, you can say that the 8 Tails has more chakra than the 3 Tails in general, but the idea that V1B alone has more chakra than the entire 3 Tails doesn't seem very plausible, meaning Yagura might have too much chakra for Sasuke to be able to put under Genjutsu. Plus, even though the lake does give Taka the advantage in most of these fights, since Suigetsu can use it to form his water avatar, I think the terrain will actually benefit Yagura as well here, since the 3 Tails is stated to be the most skilled tailed beast at underwater combat, implying that if Yagura transforms, he should be even better at swimming than B, which will make things pretty dicey for Taka if he decides to mainly fight underwater. And considering Yagura also has really broken genjutsu, like the Coral Palm which completely restrains anyone it hits, as well as his water mirrors that can replicate any attack thrown at him, even when facing multiple people, Yagura shouldn't really have any problem fighting against Taka. The only issue I could see him running into here is the Amaterasu, but even that might not work on Yagura, since I think he does have good enough control over his tail beast chakra to potentially glob it off with a chakra cloak, just like Naruto did in the final valley fight. So, since Yagura is significantly stronger than everyone in Taka, has a really solid ninjutsu arsenal, and even Sasuke's most powerful ninjutsu isn't guaranteed to work on him, Yagura should be able to win this fight the large majority of the time. Next up, the Jinchuriki that Taka is trying to capture is Roshi, the host of the Four Tails. Now I will say that in general, scaling Roshi requires a lot less speculation than Yagura, because as I mentioned earlier, we've literally seen him form a full chakra avatar of the Four Tails and fire off Biju bombs in the Minato one-shot. In this encounter, it's also just heavily implied that both Roshi and Han are significantly above Minato and Jiraiya, since Roshi just blatantly tells them that they can't put up a fight without the help of the Nine Tails. Admittedly, this is a teenage Minato who hadn't even learned the Rasengan yet, so I don't think that overpowering him specifically is super impressive, but at the very least, forcing Jiraiya to retreat and then comment on how the encounter was a close call is still pretty insane. Although, exactly how impressive this feat is does mostly depend on the extent that Jiraiya got stronger from the Third Great Shinobi War. Personally, I'm of the opinion that Jiraiya did in fact get stronger by a significant amount from the war, because even though it seems like all he does is research at the hot springs for his novels, it is just stated in the second data book that Jiraiya trains like a Spartan. And this is also consistent with the fact that Jiraiya blatantly lost to Orochimaru when he tried to stop him from leaving the village. Yet by the start of the series, Jiraiya is noted to be on par with Orochimaru, implying that he caught up to him. Keep in mind, we know that Orochimaru was also learning new jutsu and consistently growing in power for over a decade. So for Jiraiya to catch up to this version of Orochimaru, it means that he had to have become way stronger from the Third Great Shinobi War. For this reason, I don't think that Roshi is as strong as the full power Sannin, but this doesn't mean that Taka will have an easy time against him, since even though I don't want to sound like a broken record, Taka is still going to have a rough time when facing a Jinchuriki that can form a Biju avatar and fire off tailed beast bombs. In fact, I would go as far as to say that if Roshi decides to activate his chakra avatar, both Karin and Jugo would become virtually useless, because they aren't strong enough to combat against him, and even though their healing powers are normally very useful, if Sasuke gets directly hit by a Biju bomb, there realistically wouldn't be anything left to regenerate. As for Suigetsu, he should be capable of faring significantly better against Roshi due to the terrain favoring his hydrification ability, and since Roshi isn't capable of maneuvering in the water like Yagura, this is going to put him at a pretty big disadvantage. Shinobi are very proficient at walking on water by allocating chakra to their feet, but even when taking this into account, trying to stand on a lake that Suigetsu has full control over will still be a nightmare. Specifically, When on water, Roshi's avatar will be a lot more vulnerable, since in his fight against Team Jiraiya, it had an opening on the bottom where he was standing on the ground, which means that if Roshi walks on water, Suigetsu may be able to enter the avatar from below alongside the rest of Taka. And remember, Roshi doesn't have any knowledge of Suigetsu, so he wouldn't even know to avoid the lake, implying that there is actually a decent possibility that Sasuke, Jugo, and Suigetsu would be able to jump Roshi from inside his own avatar. This scenario would be disastrous for Roshi, since the biggest trump card in his arsenal are Biju bombs, but those would obviously be completely off the table if the fight is taking place inside the avatar itself. Now, to be fair, it's not like Roshi is useless without his avatar, since he does have lava release ninjutsu that even Kisame noted was hard to deal with. However, the problem with this is that the majority of Sasuke's arsenal completely counters almost all lava release jutsu. This is because lava release is a Kenka Genkai that's composed of both fire and earth style, which is a really bad affinity to have when going up against Sasuke, because earth style is weak to lightning style. So, because of this elemental matchup, I think that Sasuke's numerous Chidori variants would be able to completely destroy any lava style jutsu Roshi tries to use pretty easily, which essentially means that if Taka manages to breach the avatar, it effectively results in an automatic loss for Roshi. And even if you give Roshi the benefit of the doubt, by assuming that he decides to stay on land so Suigetsu can't attack him from below, the Amaterasu is still going to be a massive issue for him. In general, there's no proof that Roshi has the same amount of finesse that someone like Naruto or even Yagura does when it comes to controlling Tailed Beast Chakra, which makes the idea that he could easily brush off the Amaterasu using a version 1 cloak seem a lot more far-fetched. Because of this, I think that whether or not Roshi would be able to survive the Amaterasu comes down to one major point, which is whether or not the flames would spawn directly on his body or land on the avatar in front of him instead. Luckily, there isn't a lot of speculation required to determine what would happen here, since we've already seen that when Sasuke was transported to Kaguya's dimension and completely encased in ice, he could still spawn the Amaterasu directly on his hand, implying that as long as an object is see-through, Sasuke is able to cast the Amaterasu through it. This means that Roshi is probably screwed, since we know that in character, he does stand still inside his avatar while fighting, which means that Roshi will be wide open to get hit by the Amaterasu should Sasuke decide to use it. The only real way I could see Roshi survive the Amaterasu is if he opts to use his lava chakra mode instead, because in that case the Amaterasu would probably land on the lava itself rather than him directly, which would give Roshi time to take it off. But even in this case scenario, where Roshi decides to use lava chakra mode instead of his avatar, we just loop back around to the same problem that Sasuke's lightning style jutsu has a type advantage against lava release, so Roshi would likely lose anyways to a basic Chidori. Because of this, even though Roshi is beyond Taka in terms of raw power, his chances of actually beating them aren't great. As I'm sure you've heard many times before, fights in Naruto tend to be a lot more matchup based rather than series like Dragon Ball, and this is just one of those scenarios where Sasuke happens to have a counter for everything in Roshi's arsenal, so Taka should be able to capture him the large majority of the time. Moving on, the next Jinchuriki Taka has to capture is Han, the host of the Five Tails. Now I will say that Han seemed to fight pretty similarly to Roshi in the Minato one-shot, since he also summoned a chakra avatar and fired a Biju bomb alongside him. However, unlike Roshi, Han isn't weak to Sasuke's lightning style, and just generally has a much better fighting style to combat Taka. For example, earlier I mentioned that Suigetsu could potentially maneuver Taka inside Roshi's chakra avatar to jump him, but that would be a lot less effective against Han, since he is an absolute monster when it comes to taijutsu due to boil release. As I've already mentioned, all the Jinchuriki who are being controlled by Obito should be roughly relative to Taka in terms of speed. So if Han activates Boil Release, which massively boosts his speed and power, he might be fast enough to catch them off guard at close range. After all, despite KCM Naruto being able to keep up with the Jinchuriki pretty well while they were in base, against Han's Boil Release, he got kicked in the face and sent flying before he could even react. Naruto was more so focused on removing the Rinnegan Rod from Roshi in this scene, but while in KCM, he can sense the intentions of everyone around him even while blinded. So Naruto failing to block Han here implies that he became too fast for Naruto to deal with. Of course, I'm not trying to say that Han had KCM1 levels of speed while he was alive, since he was being powered up by Obito in this scene, but what this feat does show is that, in general, Boil Release amplifies Han's speed to a ridiculous degree. So, considering that even without Boil Release, Han should already be relative in speed to everyone in Taka, when he activates it, no one in Taka would be capable of keeping up with him. Now, to be fair, we've only ever seen shinobi use Boil Release to amplify their strength for extremely short periods of time, so it's not like Han could realistically maintain this level of speed for the entire fight, but I will say that if Sasuke tries to engage in close combat, just like he did against B, Han might unironically one-shot him with a Boil Release enhanced kick to the face. And if he follows this up with a couple Biju bombs before Taka can properly regroup, I do think that Han would take the win. Plus, much like Yagura, Han seems to have control over a massive portion of the Five Tails' chakra, so Sasuke being capable of putting him under Genjutsu is very questionable, and definitely not something that should be considered a reliable win condition. In fact, the only jutsu in Sasuke's arsenal that I think has a close to guaranteed chance of working is the Amaterasu, since as I already explained, it would likely be capable of spawning on the inside of Han's avatar, and if he does come into contact with the Black Flames, Han doesn't really have a great way to survive. Although, I do think it's worth pointing out that at this point in the series, Sasuke is a lot less willing to use the Amaterasu than he is later in the war arc, which does make sense since this version of Sasuke has literally never used it on his own before, until his fight with B. So, while Amaterasu is a good win condition that could realistically take Han down, it's also important to consider that just like in the original fight against B, Amaterasu isn't likely to come out until Sasuke is pretty desperate, and Han will have numerous opportunities to take Taka on before then, especially since he's not going to screw around in the same way that B was. Because of this, even though Taka does definitely have a chance to capture Han, I do think that Han would be capable of beating them more times than not, since unlike Roshi, he is very well suited for close combat and doesn't have an elemental weakness against Sasuke. It still has the advantage of forming a Biju avatar that can casually fire off tailed beast bombs. Following Han, the Jinchuriki being pit against Taka is Utakata, who houses the Six Tails. Compared to the other Jinchuriki I've covered so far, Utakata is a bit of a weird case in the manga, since we never really get any feats or statements surrounding him while he was alive. The fourth databook does state that Utakata uses bubbles to fight, which is also shown when he was revived by Obito, but other than that, Kishimoto just never seemed to expand upon his character, with even the Akatsuki member that captured him being completely unknown. However, it would be pretty boring to just say that Utakata gets captured because he has no feats. So for this matchup, I am going to make a bit of an exception and dip into anime only content that doesn't explicitly contradict the manga, just to make things a bit more interesting. The reason the anime shakes things up a lot for Utakata is because it actually shows how he got captured by the Akatsuki, which was a straight up fight against Pain himself. And despite losing to Pain, Utakata was still able to put up a great fight once he entered his version 2 cloak, as he literally one-shot both the Preta path and the human path without using ninjutsu. Considering that even Sage Mode Jiraiya's taijutsu wasn't enough to defeat the Paz in one attack, this would imply that Utakata's physical strength is beyond Sannin level, which is consistent with the fact that the only other person to ever one-shot a Path of Pain with purely taijutsu is Sage Mode Naruto. In fact, I would argue that Utakata's strength feats against Pain are even better than Naruto's, because Pain had just finished fighting the entire Leaf Village before confronting Naruto, meaning that despite their feats looking very similar, Utakata actually one-shot a stronger version of Pain, which makes things way more impressive for him. So, at the absolute worst, Utakata should be relative physically to Sage Mode Naruto, which is going to be a massive problem for Taka because it's just blatantly stated at this point in the series that Naruto is stronger than Sasuke. Of course, you may be able to argue that having the help of Suigetsu, Jugo, and Karin could help Sasuke to the point that he's capable of fighting shinobi like Utakata, who are on Naruto's level, but I think that's a very tough sell considering just how much weaker Taka Sasuke is when compared to Naruto. To put the power gap between them into perspective, after Sasuke fought B, he proceeded to become so much stronger that even while only using his 3-Tomo Sharingan, Karin remarks that Sasuke's chakra has become both darker and thicker than when he tapped into Orochimaru's curse mark, implying that the power boost Sasuke had obtained from his hatred increasing eclipsed even the curse mark's second stage. Then, Sasuke would proceed to run a gauntlet against all 5 Kage, allowing him to not only unlock the Susanoo, but also successfully evolve it multiple times, which was Obito's reasoning for sending him there in the first place. Yet, even after this exponential boost in power, Sasuke was still only Sage Mode Naruto's equal, since Naruto himself stated that if they were to fight, it would result in both of their deaths. I see people take this statement out of context a lot to say that a half-dead Sasuke would have stalemated Naruto in that scene, but if you actually read what Naruto says, it becomes crystal clear that he is talking about the fight that would happen if Sasuke were to attack the Leaf Village one day in the future, meaning Naruto was referring to a full power well-rested Sasuke and not the one currently in front of him. A common rebuttal to this may be that Naruto just doesn't know how strong Sasuke is, but this is blatantly false as well, because Naruto sensed the fight between Kakashi and Sasuke while he was in Sage Mode, and it's during this fight that Sasuke unlocks the highest form of the Susanoo he had ever achieved to date. So if anyone knows how powerful Sasuke is, it's Naruto. So, when you consider that Sage Mode Naruto is equal to MS Sasuke at his absolute peak in power, then Utakata, who is physically stronger than this version of Naruto, should be capable of beating the brakes off of Taka, due to their strongest member being way weaker than Naruto. Taka's only ways to take Utakata down here is if Sasuke manages to catch him in a Genjutsu or a Amaterasu. However, considering how much faster and stronger Utakata is in this scenario, I genuinely think that once he activates the version 2 cloak, Sasuke is going to go down alongside his teammates before he even taps into his Mangekyo, since at this point in the series, he only seems to use it in character after he's already been struggling for a while. Funnily enough, I think the member of Taka that Utakata is going to have the most trouble against is actually Suigetsu, since none of the jutsu in his arsenal have a good way to deal with hydrification, and since we've never seen Utakata use a Biju Bomb, knocking Suigetsu out with pure explosive power isn't an option either. Although, Suigetsu does have one weakness in this fight, which is his limited chakra supply, because once he runs out of chakra, he won't be able to turn into water anymore. This is actually the exact same thing we see happen to Konan, who got stabbed in the back by Obito, despite normally being able to pass through attacks like that, because she didn't have enough chakra to maintain her paper body. So, I think Utakata should be able to destroy the majority of Taka right away, due to the massive power gap between them, and then all he has to do is beat Suigetsu in a battle of attrition, which shouldn't be that difficult, since Utakata possesses way more chakra than him, and Suigetsu has no way to physically harm combatants on the level of Sage Mode Naruto, leading to a pretty concrete W for the Jinchuriki of the Six Tails. However, The same thing can't be said about Taka's next opponent, because Fu, the Jinchuriki of the Seven Tails, has almost no feats in the manga, and the anime never shows her going all out in a fight. The only real relevant information we get about Fu's strength comes from Data Book 4, because it implies that she could use partial transformation to grow wings even while alive, which is impossible to do unless a Jinchuriki has very good control over their tailed beast. This might sound strange, because in the Obito fight, literally every Jinchuriki was actively using partial transformation, but this was only because Obito was actively controlling the tailed beasts and forcing them to work with the Edo Jinchuriki. In reality, partial transformation is actually considered to be extremely impressive, as Kisame was absolutely astounded that B could pull it off, and said that because he could do it, B was worthy of being called the epitome of Jinchuriki. Considering Kisame has seen 3 of the most skilled Jinchuriki to ever live at this point in the series, I think it's fine to take his word on the skill level required to use partial transformations. So since Fu is capable of it, she must possess really good control over the Seven Tails, which is the 3rd strongest tailed beast if you believe Kuruma's analysis. Although, determining exactly what she's capable of doing with the Seven Tails is still pretty difficult, since we just don't know how the difficulty of something like forming a chakra avatar compares to growing wings. In my opinion, I think it's fair to say that Fu should at least be capable of tapping into a version 2 cloak, since Kisame had already seen B do this, but was still surprised that he could transform a single part of himself, implying that the former is easier to accomplish. But even with this charitable assumption in Fu's favor, claiming that she could beat Taka is still a really hard sell. In terms of ninjutsu, Fu does have the ability to create powder that emits light, which may be useful for countering Sasuke's Sharingan, but the problem is that this literally only lasts for 2 pages the one time we see her use it. And considering that Fu doesn't have any speed feats, it's pretty much impossible to argue that she could defeat Sasuke or any member of Taka in that time frame. And unfortunately, if Fu isn't going to be able to defeat Taka close to the beginning of the fight, then she is completely screwed, because as the battle goes on, Sasuke becomes more and more likely to pull out his Mangekyo, which Fu has no counter for. We've never seen Fu resist a genjutsu on screen, and as far as we know, despite having good control over the Seven Tails chakra, there's no proof that she has access to a massive portion of it. So if Fu gets hit by a Mangekyo genjutsu, there's practically a 100% chance that she won't be able to break out of it. Alternatively, Sasuke could also just choose to use the Amaterasu, which would also be an equally effective way to take Fu down. So I really don't see any possible way for Fu to avoid capture here. Last but not least, the Jinchuriki taking on Taka here is Naruto himself. To clarify, the version of Naruto I'm going to be using here is from right before he left to train at Mount Miyaboku, since I think I already made it pretty clear in the Utakata section why Sagebo Naruto is far too strong for Taka to be able to fight him. I know some of you may think it's equally pointless to pit this Naruto against Taka, since he already got his butt kicked by base Sasuke at the start of Shippuden, but this completely misses the fact that Naruto got way stronger after this fight, to the point where it shouldn't even be used to gauge how Naruto and Sasuke compared to each other. This is because Naruto's use of the Shadow Clone training method in order to master the Rasen Shuriken gave him 9,800 hours worth of additional experience. To put that into perspective, if Naruto trained 8 hours a day, every day, for 3 years, that would still be less time than the amount of experience he managed to gain in 1 day. I honestly don't think that people talk about this nearly enough, since it's practically the equivalent of Naruto getting a second time skip to hone his skill, which is why he can't really be compared to his previous self that lost to Sasuke. Of course, a common rebuttal to this would be that since Naruto is specifically training in order to master the Rasen Shuriken, it's not like this experience would actually make him stronger as a whole, but the problem with this argument is that Naruto states that he was trying to work on his chakra control, which improving does enhance overall combat power. In Ebisu's training with Naruto, we learn that if a shinobi's chakra control is bad, they aren't able to put as much chakra into their ninjutsu, resulting in an overall weaker technique. So, by improving his chakra control, Naruto should be capable of putting more chakra into his jutsu, which means that both his Rasengan and Shadow Clones became more powerful after his training. And, considering that Naruto also mentions focusing chakra into his limbs in order to amplify his speed, being able to use chakra more efficiently would also make him faster as well. This is also consistent with Kakashi admitting that Naruto has surpassed him after the training was completed, which is very impressive considering that previously, Naruto couldn't beat Kakashi in a straight up fight even with the help of Sakura. I have seen the point that Kakashi could have only been referring to the Rasen Shuriken here, since after Tsunade bans Naruto from using it, Kakashi says that Naruto might surpass him in the future, obviously implying that Naruto hasn't surpassed him yet. But this statement was actually mistranslated by Viz, and when you look at what Kishimoto wrote in the Japanese, Kakashi actually says that Naruto is either on par with him or even beyond that. This means that even after Naruto lost the Rasen Shuriken, Kakashi is still convinced that he is at least on par with him, which means that Naruto unironically became so much stronger from the start of Shippuden that he could take on both his past self and Sakura at the same time. As for where this puts Naruto on the totem pole in comparison to Sasuke, I think reaching Kakashi's level should scale him over 3 Tomo Heavy Sasuke. This probably seems weirdly specific, but the reason why I bring up this version of Sasuke is because when Kakashi is telling Naruto about the Shadow Clone training method, he says that it will make him stronger than Sasuke and might even allow Naruto to surpass himself. Kakashi stating as a matter of fact that the Shadow Clone training will make Naruto stronger than Sasuke, yet only using the word maybe in reference to himself getting surpassed, implies that Kakashi thinks he is stronger than Sasuke, which would also be supported by Naruto only reacting to the idea of surpassing Kakashi, implying that Naruto himself considers the idea of surpassing Kakashi to be more shocking than Sasuke. This may seem questionable since Kakashi hasn't seen Sasuke after the time skip, but considering he says that Yamato told him everything about Sasuke in the exact same conversation, Kakashi should know how strong and fast he is, at least without the curse mark, due to Sasuke not using it against Team 7. So, since Kakashi is of the opinion that he is stronger than 3 Tomo Sasuke, and Naruto successfully surpassed Kakashi, it implies that Naruto is stronger than this version of Sasuke as well. The only possible contradiction to this argument would be that Naruto still thought he was inferior to Sasuke during the Kakuzu fight, but when I went back to reread this scene in the manga, I actually think it implies the exact opposite narrative. In this scene, after Naruto's Rasen Shuriken fails the first time, he tells Kakashi that he still wants to take Kakuzu on alone because Naruto wants to prove what he can do, and it's at this point that a picture of Sasuke with his Sharingan activated is shown. In my opinion, the obvious implication here is that Naruto wants to take on Kakuzu alone so that he can prove to himself that he is capable of bringing Sasuke back to the village. And after Kakashi accepts this proposal, Naruto does successfully defeat Kakuzu by himself, meaning he did in fact prove that Sasuke can be brought back to the village. Because of this, if anything, I would argue that this scene actually supports the idea that Naruto is confident that he could bring Sasuke back, since Naruto literally achieves what he wanted to do in order to prove himself capable. Obviously, this wouldn't include Sasuke's second stage curse mark, as Naruto has never seen Sasuke use it after the final Valley fight, and he does specifically think about 3 Tomo Sasuke without the curse mark when trying to prove that he can bring Sasuke back to the village, but even scaling over this version of Sasuke is more than enough to make Naruto very competitive in a fight against Taka. We've already seen 3 Tomo Sasuke completely blitz both Jugo and Suigetsu, so Naruto should be way too fast for everyone in Taka except for Sasuke himself. Now when it comes to comparing Naruto's speed to Taka Sasuke's, things get a bit more complicated, because you kind of have to compare how 3-tomo heavy Sasuke would stack up to his Taka counterpart. In my opinion, before Taka Sasuke activates his Mangekyo, I would actually lean towards heavy Sasuke and Naruto by extension having the edge in speed, since as I've said many times at this point, Sasuke is physically weakened from his fight with Itachi, which would cause him to get slower. Although, even if Naruto is faster than 3-tomo Sasuke and manages to press Taka at the beginning of the fight with his speed, eventually Sasuke is going to bring out the MS, which will completely change the trajectory of the battle. First of all, since the Mangekyo is described as being capable of putting several times the amount of chakra into jutsu, it should be pretty clear that the gap between it and the regular Sharingan is completely ridiculous, to the point where I don't think Naruto would have an advantage in speed anymore. In fact, if I had to bet on who's faster after the Mangekyo gets activated, I would definitely lean towards Sasuke gaining the stat advantage. But Naruto might still be a bad matchup for Sasuke even after his Mangekyo is activated, because if he decides to create 1,000 shadow clones, like he threatened to do against Itachi, then both Sasuke's Genjutsu and Amaterasu would be rendered useless. We learned when Kakashi fought Itachi that Genjutsu is completely useless against shadow clones, and since it's impossible to distinguish between Naruto and his clones, even for the Mangekyo, Sasuke's Genjutsu would be completely useless here, since he wouldn't know which Naruto to target. For similar reasons, the Amaterasu wouldn't be of much help either, since it's not like Sasuke can afford to use it dozens of times for the off chance that it hits the real Naruto, meaning there isn't really a super easy win condition for Taka in this fight. And, much like Taka, Naruto doesn't really have a surefire win condition here, but if he decides to make a bunch of shadow clones, Naruto's best bet is probably to jump them from all sides with the Rasengan Super Barrage, just like he did against the Nine Tails. Of course, this is Naruto in the War Arc, so you may be wondering whether or not he could replicate the same feat here, and I'm willing to say that not only could Naruto pull off the exact same barrage, he can also make one that's 2 times bigger. This probably sounds insane, but just hear me out for a second, okay? I promise it'll make sense. In the original Rasengan barrage used against the Nine Tails, there are 53 Naruto shown on panel using the Rasengan, but we know that he can make a much bigger one because of a statement from Kakashi during the Rasen Shuriken training. Kakashi says that in order to learn the Rasen Shuriken, Naruto was training with 200 clones, and at this point in the jutsu's development, Naruto was trying to create it by only using 2 clones per Rasengan. So, if Naruto had 2 clones for each Rasengan, and he was using 200 clones total, it implies that Naruto can unironically create 100 Rasengan in a single barrage. If Taka is caught off guard by this attack, they might just be screwed, since even one Rasengan from a kid Naruto was able to obliterate Kabuto, who is as strong as Kakashi. So when you multiply this attack by 100, almost any shinobi would struggle to survive it. However, Taka does luckily have one way to tank this jutsu if they react in time, which is with Suigetsu's water avatar, since as hard as the Rasengan Super Barrage hits, it is definitely not stronger than an 8 Tails Biju Bomb, which Suigetsu did manage to shield Taka from. Because of this, even though you can make a decent argument for Naruto putting up a very good fight against Taka, it's much harder to find a way that he can actually win, especially since given Naruto's track record of fighting Sasuke in the past, I don't think it's guaranteed that he would try to make a crap ton of shadow clones at the beginning of the battle. This is obviously problematic for Naruto because it means that he will still be very much open to getting hit by Genjutsu and the Amaterasu from Sasuke. Couple this with the fact that Sasuke can afford to take at least 2 mortal injuries due to the healing from both Karin and Jugo, and Naruto's odds of victory here become even slimmer. I think if this were a one-on-one fight between Naruto and Sasuke, then I would be much more inclined to argue in Naruto's favor, but when you take into account the healing Sasuke can get, in addition to being shielded by Suigetsu's water avatar, Taka should be able to capture Naruto pretty confidently more times than not. So, to wrap things up, the only Jinchuriki who could successfully defeat Taka, outside of B, are Yagura, Han, and Utakata if you take the anime into account, giving Taka a final record of 5-3 in their favor. Thanks for watching. If you want to watch another video by me, make sure to check out this one, where I talk about Team 7 versus every Otsutsuki clan member. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Later.